Hey guys, welcome to the Juggernaut. This is a new podcast about Shadow Era, and I'm Gronderson,
I'm Dark Void.
and we are going to just talk a little bit about key metagame cards this week. You can contact me at Telegram at GRAWNDERSTON.
And me at TJ Dark Void X with a space between the TJ and the Dark.
There we go. Great. So we're just going to talk about some key metagame cards this week, and just these are cards that you will see if you ladder and play any number of games, so it's good to be familiar with them. Two of them are human, two of them are shadow. So before we get any further, we'll just jump into it. The first one is Cecilio Brothers Landing.
Now, the first thing I'd like to mention is you're more likely to see these cards as you go like higher up in the ratings. At lower ratings, you can see pretty much anything, but as you get higher, you'll see more and more of these cards because they're just some of the best decks.
Yes, you will see them some on low ratings, but you'll see these cards very consistently on higher ratings because those are the people that will look up deck lists. They're the people that will look up what the best decks are, and they will notice trends, and they'll play the good cards because they're good. People who aren't as high rated just are ones that play it casually, which is fine, but that means they're playing it for fun, not for as competitive, if that makes sense. But yeah, I was saying the first one's Cecilio Brothers Landing. It's a location, turn 4, and it just has a static ability for the controller that says whenever you discard an ability, at the end of turn you draw 2 cards for each ability you discarded. The opposing ability is one shadow energy, and the controller of it discards a card at random. So the control of this location will not change. The main decks, you don't see it with a main hero, but what you see it with is you see it with Templars, you see it with the discard theme. And
Pretty much every human hero can run it at this point.
Yeah, you see it, the main ones are Yathan, because he can give something double attack, or you see it with mages because they just burn and they throw fireballs and lightning strikes and supernovas.
Aramia in particular, because she can use her ability to search for Justicar's Cake, which has great synergy with a lot of Templars.
Yes, just a plug, if you want to go to shadow-era-strategy.blogspot.com, I do have an article just on this deck specifically because of how prominent it is. It goes a little bit more in depth, like he said, about the deck itself rather than the card. But just what's your thoughts on the card in general?
Well, so a lot of people, it's definitely the most powerful draw card in the entire game right now. It's pretty easy to draw like 4 to 6 cards a turn with it for 0 cost, which is just flat out ridiculous. And there's a reason that Socilo decks, there's like 3 or 4 of them that I would all consider tier 1. But the developers are looking at nerfing Socilo pretty soon, so
they are.
hopefully we can
Did
see
you not?
that.
They have announced an official nerf. I can't remember what it is. I could pull it up, but we're just going to talk about it.
I believe they're making the active side, you only draw 1 card for each ability and location discarded.
Yes,
and they're making the flip side a little bit worse as well, though. You just pay 1 shadow energy to draw a card and then discard a card.
Right. So it works. The new ability on the other side just works positively for the opponent rather than negatively for the controller. But I would agree here. Overall, it's a very overpowered card. Someone in our guild, Streets Ahead, he ranked very high, and he literally put a post out in our group chat. He said the tier 1 decks are Socilio, and he named about 5 heroes, and then he said Resource Denial Baduru. So out of what he says are the top 6 decks, and he ranked top 2, I think maybe 1, he said 5 of them are Cecilio decks. So this is something that they are nerfing. It's something that I think still could see play after this, but I don't think it will see nearly as much because at this point it's just straight up overpowered.
I believe Streets placed first at one point, but I think he ended up 3rd at the end of the season.
Yeah, okay. I think he still might have qualified for the seasonal. Though.
Yeah,
he still qualified for the seasonal because he played 100 games and someone else probably didn't. Or they were already
I think,
in.
The top 1 guy had already been qualified, so
right.
He didn't count or something.
Just what we're talking about is every 4 months there's a seasonal tournament, and the top 2 place each ladder month. get into the tournament, and you have to play 100 games. So if one of the top two doesn't play 100 games, the third person gets in.
All right, so back to Sosilo.
Yeah.
The main cards it's used with are generally Bannerman of Unaxio,
Right.
Sabrine, which is also Bannerman and Sabrine are both also getting nerfed soon.
Right. They're
There's
nerfing
General
deck.
of Unaxio also getting nerfed.
And
Moment of Acquiesce and Paladin of Anaxio. So
yes.
Wolven is hitting the deck extremely hard because they're aware that it's probably the best deck right now.
And if you take note of those cards, literally Socilio gives you benefit for discarding. Literally every single one of those cards is either a 0 or 1 cost discard ability once it's in play. Sabrine's 1 cost, everything else is just nothing, free discard.
Yep.
So it's a very powerful deck. I think if you're going 1 for 1, like the Nerf is doing, I think it's a more fair deck. But I think the biggest thing being right now is just a combo deck, which historically in just card games in general can be overpowered. And in this case, at first it seemed like a very inconsistent deck when it popped up on the forums. Someone said this is OP and needs to be nerfed. I didn't agree with them, and at this point, I realized they were completely right, and the card's just busted.
The problem with it is that discard is supposed to be a cost that you're paying for the effects, and so CeeLo makes not just currently it not just negates the cost, but it flat out makes it an upside.
Right.
So all these cards like Sabrine and Bannerman that were meant for like okay you get to pay a card in order to give something haste, you get to pay a card to deal 2 damage. Instead, it becomes you get to draw 2 cards in order to deal 2 damage. You get to draw 2 cards in order to give a creature haste, and that doesn't really make sense that you get a positive effect in order to get a positive effect.
If this deck does see play after the nerf, I think it would be with Aramia because of the cape, and I think it would be with Yathan because if you have a cape in play, you can attack once, or you can use Yathan's ability, attack twice, and then use the cape. And then I'm not sure if it lets him attack 1 more time, or if he's readied, it might let him attack 2 more times. I'm not sure, but either way, you're attacking a lot of times. So I think Yathan and Aramia go more all in on the combo than these other decks that are just running it just to be good, because Zana just plays it just to draw cards, and it's just
and the other thing is
powerful.
that a lot of decks were running. I mean, it is pretty much their only draw engine. They'd run maybe some Glimmer of Hopes, which is not actually a draw effect. It's just draw 3, discard 2. So you end up with the same number of cards in hand, unless you're playing Sosilo, in which case it draws you like 7.
And it just lets you dig deeper and deeper if you don't have Sosilo.
Yeah, because with Sosilo not drawing as many cards anymore, they're probably going to have to spend more slots on like draw cards, like I don't know, Blood Frenzy if Warriors are running it, that sort of thing.
Well, if you look
that further cuts into the like combo pieces they can run.
Well, if you look at just in general neutral draw power, Bad Santa's neutral, but you don't have any like human or shadow cards that are very good at drawing outside of Cultist. But then you see very class-specific cards that each deck uses. Cecilo's been nothing like that. Just been every human deck has literally played Cecilo at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. Bad Santa, while a neutral card that sees a lot of play, is a card that has a significant drawback in that, if you use it when your opponent doesn't have that many cards in hand, it helps them as much as it helps you.
Right.
So Sosilo just doesn't have any drawback like that. There's really no situation in which Sosilo is going to hurt you more than it helps.
But the main thing being that the very strong draw engines up until this point have been class specific, and they've been very focused on one deck or one archetype, whereas Sosilo has just been extremely powerful and just across the board.
Mm-hmm.
So the second card we're going to go into is Priest of the Light. It's a human ally for 3 resources. It's a 3/3, and when it enters the battlefield, your opponent loses 1 shadow energy and gains 1 life, or you gain 1 life. And I will say, while it doesn't look like a great card just at the outset, this is a very solid card to have in any sort of human deck.
Yeah, since its introduction, it's been run in pretty much every or most human decks that are trying to play on curve, like a 2-drop, 3-drop, 4-drop sort of thing. They're all running Priest of the Light, even some that aren't are running it, just because the shadow energy denial is so important.
And when you look at it, it's very powerful because if you just have a 3/3 for 3, and let's say you're playing against Zaladar, so you play your 3/3 on curve, and then what they do is they use their ability on their 4th turn to kill your priest, kill your 2-drop, or maybe even your 4-drop. But when you look at priest, he denies them the shadow energy, which means that you don't just start out the game 2 cards behind from the gates. Same thing with just lots of other heroes that use their shadow energy ability, such as against Spiduru, and in just especially heroes that have 4 shadow energy as a cost for their ability.
Yeah, because of Shadow Era's unique mechanics that creatures sort of have first strike while attacking, to put it in Magic terms, that if they kill a creature that they attack, they don't take damage back. Because of that, it becomes a lot harder to take board control with just minions, and most heroes' abilities are meant to counteract that. Like Aladwin, you can activate her ability for 4 shadow energy to kill most, 2 drops, 3 drops, 4 drops, even some bigger things. And even if it doesn't kill it, it'll at least, stop your opponent from using it for a couple turns.
Right.
Saladar, like he mentioned, can, kill something, weaken another, that sort of thing. If you put them back another turn from using that ability and taking back board control, that gives you another turn to play another minion, so that when they finally do get to use their ability, you have a much stronger board and you can keep control of it.
So, and the thing is, I think just to touch on board control, if you really look at the good decks, just ignoring Cecilio in the current metagame, historically it has been stuff like Control Zaladar, which plays very heavy board control. Recently, Praxis has been very good. It rushes the board early and gains the control quick. And just in general, board control with Shadow Era is such a different dynamic than most games because you can attack creatures directly, and like you said, it very often you attack with no drawback because you killed the creature you're attacking. So it's just such a different game board control wise than other games like Hearthstone or Magic, just in terms of how important it is and how hard it is to regain it back. Such as in Hearthstone, if you have a 3/3 and someone else charges their 3/3 into it, the board is clear. In Shadow Era, one player loses their creature or ally in Shadow Era, where the other player still has theirs, and that's why haste in Shadow Era is very powerful as well.
Yeah, and that's another thing that makes Bannerman so strong, of course. The
Yes.
Inaxio Bannerman, which is a key card in the Sosilo deck, is that it enables them to use, well, and Justicar's Cape as well, enables them to use Knight of Inaxio very quickly, swing in for 5 damage without the opponent being able to really put any counterplay in, and that'll kill most minions and get you board control instantly.
Yeah, and the biggest thing just being that when you talk about board control, the thing is that there's different ways to do it, but Priest of the Light does it in a way that you're not only developing your board control, but you're also slowing down your opponent's way of stopping you. So it's a double-edged sword where you're playing forwards and you're putting them on the back foot, which is a very it doesn't seem that powerful when you do it, but it's just such a consistent performer, especially against certain decks. It's just a very powerful card, especially if you're
Yeah.
trying to, like you said, curve out.
Priest of the Light is definitely a card where you sort of feel its effects more when you're playing against it than when you're playing it.
Oh, most certainly.
Because sometimes you're just you're really waiting on that Zaladar ability. You can kill their Puin, their nice 2 drop, and their priest as well. But then you get put back another turn, and you're like, okay, whatever. I'll just take 5 damage and then use it next turn. And then they play another priest of the light, and then
Oh,
another, and
I,
you
I,
never end up getting bored back.
I think Sleeping Dragon sent a picture into the chat one time where someone had 4 priests on the board, and it was
Yeah,
just it. It's literally when you play one, it's a strong card. If you happen to draw two, and your opponent is a deck that relies heavily on their ability some, it is just so crippling. You will win so many games where you just play 2 Priests of the Light. It's so I would agree with you that you feel it more playing against it than you do playing it. But once you feel it, you see it more when you play it.
mm-hmm.
And
It's also a card that's much better going first, because if you go first, you have much more of an advantage. Like, you have a better opportunity to take control of the board at the beginning, because you get to play the
right,
first 2 drop of the game, you get to play the first 3 drop of the game. If you're going second, you're not that likely to have board control on turn 3 when you play it, so it can just get killed somewhat easily due to its 3
right.
toughness.
And the other thing is if you're playing first, technically by the way the game works is you start one shadow energy behind, such as your opponent gets one, then you get your first, and they get your second, then you get your second. If you play Priest of the Light on your third turn, suddenly you are ahead on shadow energy. So you get the first turn starting bonus, and your opponent doesn't get the supposed balancing bonus from going second instead of first. So it's a strong card. I'll leave it
Mm-hmm.
at that. And I have seen Garth decks. I've had people down to just 2 or 3 life, and they're only alive because that one life saved them. So that's not negligible either.
Mm-hmm. Especially if, like you said earlier, you're playing multiple Priests of the Lights.
Right. And especially if it gets into a damage race situation, just one or two life can mean all the difference in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So did you want to leave the discussion a little bit more for the last two cards since those were the ones you selected?
Sure. So the next two cards are both shadow cards. The first one's Meat Wagon, which is
It's three resources.
a yeah, it's a 3 resource shadow item. Makes the top card of your deck viewable to all players, and while it is an ally, friendly allies get +1/+1. So this doesn't initially look like that powerful a card. I know that in Magic, certainly, we've had in Magic they're called Anthem effects because they tend to be called stuff like Glorious Anthem, like 3 mana
Right.
cost cards that give your minions +1/+1. They're not that amazing in Magic, but they are in Shadow Era because, in my opinion, it's because the metagame is very specifically placed around doing specific amounts of damage. Like a lot of minions just have 3 or 4 health on the dot, so a lot of decks are built to do 3 or 4 damage exactly.
Right.
And when suddenly all your minions have 4 or 5 health instead, it becomes a lot harder for some decks to kill them.
And I will say the thing is it says +1/+1 if the top card of your deck is an ally. However, if you build a meat wagon deck right, such as the most popular one right now is Praxis Meat Wagon. It plays 41 to 42 cards. The way it's built, you play 4 wagon and you play completely allies the rest because your allies provide your draw. And the way it works, you have a 91% chance of having a creature or an ally on top, and you have multiple ways to change what the top card is, such as Praxis's ability, or Harbinger of the Lost, or just drawing a card off one of your allies. You have
Yeah, like False
so
Blood
many ways
Cultists.
to manipulate the top that very rarely do you just find yourself not getting the effect when you really need it.
Especially because the only non-allies that you even play are Meat Wagon. So by default, if you have a Meat Wagon on the board, that means there's one less Meat Wagon that can be revealed.
Right. Because it's like you're saying, if you have a meat wagon on the field, that means at the most there's only 3 left in your deck. So it's a very good card. For the most part, it reads 3 mana. All your allies have +1/+1. And if you look at Aldon the Brave for human, it's played mainly for its +1 attack
Yeah.
to a degree. And if someone crippling blows your Aldon or captures prey and it can't attack, you still it's not removed from the game. You still feel its presence so much throughout the game. And Meat Wagon does the same thing, and it also adds toughness. So it's I would say it's the shadow equivalent of Aldon to a degree, that it
Somewhat.
pumps your whole
Yeah.
board. But it's
Yeah.
just it's such a powerful card that you do see it. It's been played in several different decks. Right now it's Praxis. You'll see it played a lot, and it's something you will see if you get higher on the ladder.
And it's particularly useful because creatures in Shadow Era minions tend to have a higher toughness than attack. You'll see stuff like Puin, the premier human 2-drop, is a 2/3. There is no
Right.
3/2 for most decks.
Mm-hmm.
This slight exception to this is Feasterling, which becomes a 3/3 on your turn at the cost of a little bit of life to your hero. But for the
Right.
like, and then stuff like Jasmine and Alden will have a higher toughness than attack. But meat, so like if your 2-drop will rarely be able to kill their 2-drop in one hit, your 3-drop will rarely be able to kill their 3-drop in one hit. But Meat Wagon makes it so that they can. Meat Wagon makes it so that Feasterling can kill any 2-drop in the game and a lot of 3-drops. It makes it so your I don't know, even Death Mages or Rampant Krygons or whatever can kill a lot of 2-drops and 3-drops that your opponents play, and that makes it
Right.
really hard for them to take back board control.
So that's what the thing is while you have the fact sitting there that it helps you with board control. The other thing is if it's sitting on the field, like you said with Rampant Krygon, suddenly before Krygon you ping the opposing ally for 1 and attack for 2, it can do 3 damage. If they have a 4 toughness ally on the board and you have a wagon, you can kill it with a Krygon. Or it's like you said, you can kill it with a Feasterling that you pay life to buff it, and it just it's like you're saying there's so many allies where a kill for another ally would be 1 point short, and that's why you don't attack into it and you end up hitting each other's face early game instead of going after each other's allies just because you can't kill it because you just both have 1 ally. But when you go turn 2, 2-drop, turn 3, meat wagon, and kill their ally, it's so hard for them to come back, especially if they don't have haste creatures, which are just not as common in Shadow Era because of how powerful they tend to be.
Yeah, and it also has some like particular synergies with some cards that are running the Praxis deck at least. Krygon in particular does 1 damage to another minion and then gives it +1 attack. If you have two Krygons out, they can't buff
Oh,
each other. But if you have a Meat Wagon, then suddenly now they have 2 toughness, and you can use their abilities to buff each other and get them up to a 4 attack.
oh, that sounds so good. I will
And
say
there's also I believe they run Stardust Amplifier,
some of them
which
do.
lets you, or not the amplifier, the extractor,
Yeah,
which
the
lets you
extractor.
pay the minion's life, the ally's life, in order to draw a card. And because of Meatwagon giving it 1 more health, you can then draw 1 more card off it potentially.
And it also works good with Meat Wagon because, like I was saying, if you have another wagon on top and you just activate that ability, well, then suddenly it's not a wagon anymore; it's an ally. So it helps you manipulate the top of your deck so that an ally is on top when you need it, and you're not flipping a wagon when you have a wagon in play.
Yeah. Every so often you'll have wagon on top, and then you draw a card, and then there's another wagon on top, and then you just kind of lose the game. But that's extremely rare because that requires you
Right.
to have 2 of your 3 remaining wagons on top. That's just extremely unlucky.
And I will say, we mentioned that Streets, someone in our Juggernauts guild, placed third this ranking season. He did it with Wagon Prax against all these Socilio decks we are saying are extremely OP. So this is a powerful card. Obviously, it's not as overpowered as Socilio because it doesn't need to be nerfed, but it can compete at that level to some degree. He
Uh, Street's belief anyway was that Wagon is extremely weak against Sosilo,
it
but the
is.
fact that the fact that he still got to like third in the entire Shadow era, he was like second and first at some point as well. Using a deck with a horrible matchup against Sosilo should show the power of Meat Wagon against pretty much everything else. It's an
Right.
extremely potent
I,
card and deck.
he said, I think he might have been talking to you or Oak, but he was saying he thinks that as long as you play it right, that it is a solid 350 plus rating deck. Um, Wherever we post this podcast, I'll put it in the show notes. I will put a Prax list. I believe he's made it public. There's plenty on the forums. If you don't, if I don't, it's just a discard elemental shell with wagon, and that's the only non-creatures you play. And it's a little flexible. I've played it. I play it a little different than he does. I played Slingblade Demon and or Harbinger, but it's not a hard deck to play to get good at, but it's a very hard deck to play expertly. So it's a fun deck to play at the least.
Yeah. The interesting drawback is we were mentioning that it's not much of a drawback because it's very rare for you to have so many wagons on top that you can't get rid of them. The real
Right.
drawback to running the card is that you can't run the good non-ally cards that
Right.
elementals would normally want to run, like Mind Control in particular and
Exactly.
Soul Reaper. So you lack
Mm-hmm.
a lot of healing, so you're risky. You can sort of get bursted down a little bit faster. It means you can't necessarily deal with problematic allies if they place a really big one, but all in all, it's generally worth it in order to just make all your creatures
Yes.
stronger, which is just such a powerful effect in Shadow Era.
And that's the thing, like you're saying, the drawback to wagon is not when it doesn't flip your top card properly, because that just happens one out of a lot of different games, and even when it does, it's just for one turn. The real drawback to it is you're playing for Meat Wagon, and you can't play Mind Control, you can't play any sort of other abilities or items, especially Antimatter or something else elementals like to run, especially if they're a
Yeah.
slower deck. But the thing being that it's a card you have to sculpt your deck around rather than a card that you can just shove into any deck because it's good.
Okay, so on to Death Mage.
Yes.
All right, so Death Mage Thaddeus is a Shadow ally. It's 3 cost. It's a 0/4, but really it's closer to a 2/4.
It
When
is.
it enters play, it deals 1 damage to an enemy, either ally or hero, and then once per turn, after it's been placed, you can activate its ability to deal 2 ability damage to an enemy, hero, or ally. So because it can do 2 damage a turn, it's sort of like a 2/4. The key difference is that if it gets attacked, even if it lives, it won't counterattack, and that makes it
Right.
sort of worse for retaking board. But it means that its attack, quote unquote, can't be counterattacked itself, so it's very
Right.
good for keeping board.
It's very good for controlling the board because it's like you were saying that sometimes you're 1 point short or your one creature isn't enough to kill your opponent's creature in one shot without dying itself. So in that case, you're going 1 for 1. But if Death Mage hits it with its interplay ability or with its activated ability, and then you attack in with your creature, you're not losing any, and they're losing theirs. So it turns these 1 for 1 situations into 0 for 1s where you're just gaining board.
Absolutely. And because of the fact that it's ability damage, including the enters the play damage, you can
Yes.
just use it and make sure that none of your minions take any damage when you're clearing your opponent's threats.
Right. And I will say it's very good against some deck. You see things you can kill with it is if you're playing against another shadow deck, it's very good to just if it enters play and you kill a rampant Krygon, it's just already even if they just kill it right away with a different card, they already spent 2 cards to get rid of it. You killed their Krygon, they killed it with a card, but you're only down the Death Mage. So it's a very good card because like you're saying, it's 4 toughness for 3 cost, and then it can strike at your opponents just without even. It's like it has ambush to a degree, but then it can't defend. So it's an interesting card, but you see most shadow decks run at least 1 to 2 of these.
Mm-hmm. I believe you were saying that Meatwagon is a counterpart to Alden. I think Deathmage was actually intended to be a sort of counterpart to Alden. They were printed about the same time. They were the premier faction legendaries in the first set.
Right.
And you can see that they're sort of similar. Alden gives your other minions +1 attack the turn, well, any of your turns, but the turn he comes down as well. So he'll enable your creatures to do 1 more damage and kill a threat. Thaddeus will only do the 1 damage to 1 target, but that will also help your minions kill an opposing threat when it comes down.
Yeah, so I will say that the thing about Thaddeus is that it is unique, which is the Shadow Air version of Legendary in most other games, which just means that if Deathmage Thaddeus is on the field, you cannot play another one. That's where it's a little different. But the thing being, you can play 4, but what happens is if you have 1 in your hand and 1 on the field, you just can't play the 1 in your hand, which is often a downside. That's why the most you normally see it played is 3 copies in a deck, which means you will see it most games still, because you only play 40 cards in Shadow Era.
Especially because in Shadow Era, decks have a lot of draw power. I think Shadow Era is probably the game I've played that has the most draw power out of all similar games like Magic and Hearthstone.
Yes. I'm pretty sure Bad Santa will be pretty broken in most other games. In some.
That depends. It might actually be less in some just because they don't have the hand size limit.
That's true. Well, okay, that's true. I would say in Magic, it would probably be broken, I would say, if you played it in burn.
It depends on the format.
Right, yeah. That's
combo decks would love it because 2 mana draw 3 is just so powerful when you're comboing out. Shadow Era had its own has had its own decks that try and combo out with Bad Santa. I doubt it's a deck anymore, but there used to be a deck that ran feedback, which is an elemental ability.
That was a fun deck.
3 resources, renews all your resources. Mm-hmm. So you use that to gain resources throughout your turn, while you Bad Santa to draw a ton of cards throughout your turn, and you end up being able to play a huge number of cards from your deck all at once.
I'll just touch on that since it's we're on a quick aside, but this is the deck that I played. It played Shard of Power, which gives your creatures +2 attack, and they have a maximum of 1 health. And it played Ravagers, which means it destroyed your items, but one of them would turn into a creature. So you'd rush for 15 or 20 damage in the same turn. You'd have 5 or 6 resources. So you'd play a 3-drop, you'd feedback, you would Bad Santa, play feedback, play another 3-drop, feedback, play another 3-drop, and then you would just smash in. So it was a fun deck to play. They nerfed it. It was probably a little overpowered, and if anything, it wasn't how they designed some of those cards to be used. But it was a fun deck in its time. So
that's something we've touched on a couple times throughout this podcast, I believe, is the power of haste in Shadow Era.
Yes.
How, there's not that many cards that have haste, and Deathmage has sort of haste, but not really. That deck's one of the main reasons why Wolven is very worried they don't like printing a whole lot of haste cards because of decks like that.
Yeah, now I will say, I'm just going to talk for a second about how well they do. Sometimes we do complain about how slow Wolven is in updates, but they do a good job of balancing when it's necessary. You see it because it's a digital game. they can balance cards instead of banning them, except for in extreme circumstances, such as in Magic, you have to know a ban list, and in Hearthstone, they don't balance as much. They do it, but it's
Yeah, I
not
think they
as
make like one
common.
update every 2 months or something.
Yeah, but in Shadow Era, they balance it very well, and I especially like they will buff cards and make them stronger, cards that are not played because they want diverse and they want to change. Now that only can be cards that they have not printed in physical form yet, but they will do that with the newest set that they have.
Yeah, for example, Towering Brute is a card that doesn't really see a whole lot of play now. It's
Right.
a 4 cost Shadow Ally. It's like a 1/7, has +2 attack while damaged, so it can theoretically be a 3/6. And it makes opposing allies with cost 3 or less have -2 attack the turn they're summoned. It's not a particularly remarkable card whatsoever. In the same post that Wolven made describing how they're going to be nerfing Sosilo and a lot of the cards related to it, they mentioned that they're going to be buffing Towering Brute. There
Right.
was no particular reason to do so. There aren't any like memes floating around like, oh my god, Towering Brute is the worst card. But, it's just a card that they printed and they think they might want to see some play, and it's not, so they decided to buff it a
Right.
little bit.
They also buffed one I really like is Flame Spitter. It used to be a 2/4 that dealt 1 fire damage to a ally when it entered combat with it. Now they just made the simple change of a 1/4 that deals 2 damage when something enters combat with it. So it's not overpowered in any way, but they just make it better because I think in Shadow there's a Cicillo aside, we keep saying that, but they do a good job of balancing, and you see it's a very diverse format. I mean, outside of Cicillo, you will sit there and look at the top 10 heroes on the ladder. I did this last month before the whole apocalypse happened, and you see
Yeah,
9 different heroes in the top 10 rankings on the ladder. So it's a very diverse game. They do a very good job of balancing. So
absolutely. I'd say out of I think, how many heroes do we have? Is it like 32?
how many what?
How many heroes do we have? I think 32.
Uh, 3, 30. Yeah, 32 is the right number.
32.
Yes.
I, I'd say like at least 20 of them, maybe even 25, are all, you can all build like a tier 1 or tier 2 deck out of any of
Yes.
them.
You can most certainly build a deck that will get you to between 250 and 300 with just about any hero. There's some that are just underpowered compared to others, and their power level's been undercut just since they were made. Such as Nishaven is a mage hero that doesn't see much play, and they can't buff it because it's already been printed as a physical card on their physical version of the game. But when you look at overall, you see the other two mages both see a good bit of play. So it's a diverse game, to say the least.
And even though Nishaven, they can't buff Nishaven directly, they have printed a lot of cards that are really good with Nishaven and
They
pretty much
have.
only Nishaven in order to try and buff him. They
They've
haven't
made the
been that
electric
successful,
attack.
but they've tried.
Yes, because they haven't buffed him, but you can see they have actively tried to make cards that are very good in his deck because they're immune to electrical damage, which is his ability. There's cards that boost electrical damage or have benefit if you deal electrical damage, so you don't see they can't even buff him, but they are buffing cards around him. So they make a very good effort to balance the game. And while there's not that many cards in terms of the number of sets, especially for as long as the game has been created, they do a very good job of making sure that it's balanced and that most of them are playable. Because I've never really found a card and say, hey, this card is cool, and then not been able to make a deck with it.
Yeah, and I think a particular, this might just be my opinion, but I think that part of the reason for that is because the main way that people acquire cards in Shadow Era is by buying them in the shop, and you
Yes.
you don't have to buy a pack. I know that in like pretty much any other card game, you have to buy the packs to get the card, or
Right.
else you can buy it from like a secondary source. But in order to get it right from the makers of the game, you pretty much have to buy a pack. In Shadow Era, the most efficient way to obtain cards is just buying those specific cards directly. So Wolven benefits from making as many cards as possible
Right.
viable in order to make people want to get as many cards as possible.
And the thing being that I think the other reason there's not as many sets is because if you look at some games, there are a lot of filler cards or common cards that fill in formats like Arena or Draft for other formats. In Shadow Era, there is Meltdown, but for the most part, the sets are smaller because a lot more of the cards are just playable in what's called constructed formats where you just build your deck from your collection. And I think that that's a very good thing that they have going, especially since it's a different game already, and I think it should be different because they're attacking a different angle. So I'd be really glad to see it succeed because I like the model of being able to buy the cards you need. Now, if you go to the shop and the card's bought out, it works like an economy, so it might be out, supply and demand.
Mm-hmm.
But the way it works, because even with other games, physical wise, you can buy singles. There's a secondary market, but I have tried to design card games, and the thing I've always come back to is I don't want it to be a barrier to entry price wise, and I don't want it to be like I don't like rarities as much, especially with physical cards, because how much it spikes stuff. But in Shadow Era, they've done a very good job of just making sure everything is just accessible. You could,
Yeah, absolutely. I know in a lot of card games, it'll depend on the set, but there will sometimes be sets that have, the highest rarity cards in that set will be absolutely amazing. You practically have to buy them in order to play the game
yes,
because they're so good. And most of the commons in that set, most of the cards that you'll be getting from the packs, basically, will be completely unplayable. They'll be useless. If it's a physical game, they'll be worth about as much as the cardboard they're printed on. But Shadow Era really it doesn't benefit them whatsoever to do that because nobody buys the commons. If they do that, they'll just buy only the rares. So Wolven has a money incentive to make as many cards as possible viable, and that's one of the things I really love about this game.
right. I think it's you literally could sit there, and this is not true with any other game. You could spend $30 or $35, and you could basically play any number of tier one decks and just switch decks back and forth. It's a very accessible game.
Mm-hmm.
So we go ahead and close.
Sure.
Okay, so like I said, I'm at Gronderston on Telegram. GRAWNDERSTON.
And I'm TJ Dark Void X TJ space
Yeah,
DARKVOIDX.
if you have any sort of questions you'd like to ask us, feel free to message us. If you have any ideas for topics or things you would like to hear us talk about, or just like opinions on what we've said here or stated. So, this
Mm-hmm.
has been the Juggernaut podcast, and hopefully y'all hear another episode of this and y'all like this. So, thanks.
Yeah.
Bye.